Thank you, Emil, and good evening, everyone. I want to thank the New York Public Library for inviting me to present this talk about the vibrant and provocative murals created in the Lower East Side and the historic Lower East Side in the 1970s and 80s. First, let me start by giving a grateful shout out to Aliona at the Tompkins Square Library and Emil at the Hudson Park Library for their much appreciated efforts organizing and running this event. Eva Cockcroft, a self-described activist artist and the founder of Artmakers, famously said, "Painted images cannot stop wars or win the struggle for justice, but they are not irrelevant. They fortify and enrich the spirit of those who are committed to the struggle and help to educate those who are unaware." Political artist Mike Alowitz continued the thought. When we make art in the studio, we assert our humanity. And when we make art in public, we assert our existence as social beings. And as social beings, we are going to keep in mind the larger cultural, historical, and political zeitgeist of the 1970s and 80s as we look at the themes and imagery of the Lower East Side's community murals. The title of this talk is Protest and Celebration. New York City's earliest murals are often called protest murals, yet protest is a very strange and very interesting word. Protest. Pro meaning to bring forth, and testare, to call to witness. So existing within the word protest, which we usually equate with opposition, is the idea of affirmation. And as we shall see, images of affirmation and celebration coexist with those of protest and opposition, as well as resistance and accusation. Next, please. Pablo Neruda, the great Chilean poet and political activist who lived from 1904 to 73, once said, "Murals are the people's blackboard." Mysterious to us, the images in prehistoric cave paintings were meaningful to the viewers. Early men and women knew that painted walls were an effective way to broadcast a message. People notice the murals around them. Whenever I tell people I'm a community muralist, they almost always tell me about a mural in their neighborhood or one they pass on the way to work. They remember when it was painted, what it meant to them, how it faded, when it disappeared. I'm often amazed how accurately they describe the images. Next. In the Middle Ages and Renaissance, illiterate people learned the stories of the Bible through church frescoes and stained glass windows. Next. Starting in the 1920s, the murals of Los Tres Grandes, Mexico's Diego Rivera, David Alfaro Siqueiros, and Jose Clemente Orozco both revived and created a non-colonial art and taught people their history. Next. In the United States during the Depression of the 1930s, the murals of the Work Progress Administration, or WPA, were painted in hospitals, schools, and post offices. Most presented themes referencing history and social issues, but several were purely abstract in design. So, from earliest times, the role of murals has been to beautify, educate, and celebrate, as well as to protest, organize, and on occasion, inspire action. Next. Chicago's 1967 Wall of Respect is generally considered the first community mural in the United States. the start of a national community mural movement. Energizing America's urban landscape, the murals quickly spread from Chicago to Detroit, and in the 1970s, they proliferated in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Albuquerque, Boston, Philadelphia, and New York City. The late 60s and 70s were a time of political upheaval. The murders of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, and the winding down of the civil rights era. The culmination of protests against the Vietnam War, the renaissance of the women's movement with second wave feminism, the birth of the environmental movement, and the emergence of ethnic and racial pride. Next. Although these social and political movements led to many positive changes, New York City at the time was torn apart by racial strife, street violence, poverty, and a looming fiscal crisis. There would be no help from Washington. An infamous 1975 headline in the Daily News screamed, "Ford to City, drop dead." This was the climate that fostered community murals. So, just what are community murals? First of all, they are collaborations between artists and neighborhood groups that have a particular message they want to convey. Residents play a significant role in determining themes and content, and the artists develop the imagery that conveys the message. The city's earliest community murals appeared in Harlem in the late 1960s. However, it was the prolific and high quality production of City Arts Workshop in the late 60s and 70s, followed by the murals of Artmakers in the 80s, that led to the Lower East Side being identified as the cradle of New York's community mural movement. Sue Keok, then Sue Shapiro, and City Arts founding director, led a group of Black male teens in an exploration of their experiences of life on the city's mean streets. The central image of Black power was certainly inspired by Black athletes and medalists Tommie Smith and John Carlos, who, during the playing of the Star-Spangled Banner at the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City, raised their fists high, conveying both protest and pride. Using limited colors and an innovative projected silhouette technique, after all, these teens were not artists, they painted on plywood panels, which were then attached to the building. Among the fights, we can see in the upper left corner what looks like a payoff between a cop and a dealer. This led to the first instance of mural censorship. To appease the Police Benevolent League, the offending nightstick, which we can see, was removed. Next. It is the collaboration between artists and residents, along with the mutual respect of everyone involved, that distinguishes community murals from commissioned murals, memorial walls, and what can be termed as artist-initiated murals. That is, most street art, whether aerosol or paste-ups. For Arise from Oppression, 60 teens, led by Jim Januzzi and Susan Caruso, wanted to move beyond drugs, violence, and arson, all seen on the left, to a more positive future, seen on the right. This was the first of New York City's tall walls, and the first time that scaffolding was used. This was a 6-story building, by the way. The mural includes images that recur again and again. We see raised fists as well as chains and flames, usually a reference to the landlords who, rather than maintaining their buildings, found it more profitable to torch them for the insurance, thus creating thousands of vacant lots, hundreds ultimately transformed into flourishing community gardens by neighborhood residents, many on the Lower East Side. Here, we also see how the artist's public dialogue that often occurs during a mural's creation can be as powerful as the mural itself. That ankh in the middle of the mural above those flames was originally a cross, but the Jewish residents in the buildings across the street protested. And next, that dialogue led to the Jewish ethnic mural, the first of a series of works that expressed cultural identification and group solidarity and spoke to ethnic and racial pride. Directed by Susan Caruso, the mural celebrates both the residents' heritage and the early struggles of the ILGWU, the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. We've already seen how these murals have reflected the mood and hopes of local residents. They also call attention to neighborhood concerns, chronicle cooperative efforts to address problems, convey pride of communal accomplishment, commemorate historical events, and honor local and national heroes. Next. Often, community murals are a window to the unofficial history of a neighborhood. What's depicted on the wall can provide a depth of understanding equal to, and sometimes greater, than what's in the official records. Take a look at this mural by Alan Okada. It's confusing. The mural is at the bottom of the building, but shares the wall with two small real billboards. We see historical scenes of miners, railroad workers, a sweatshop, and a musician. They surround four large faces intended to represent a contemporary Chinese family. Yet, many members of the community saw them as political portraits of Mao and his followers. The competing loyalties among residents to Taiwan and mainland China were further fueled by the large billboard at the top, commissioned by the building's owner, Colonel Edward Hong, who really did resemble Mao. Next. Alan Okada's trompe-l'oeil mural, wait, that's not a real street, shows Chinatown stripped of cliches while avoiding any reference to the gang activity in the neighborhood then raging out of control. The distinguished elderly man on the right stands in contrast to a prostitute, a deck of cards floating over a dead man, and gawking tourists. Next. Those of us who love Italian Renaissance painting take real pleasure in this mural. It smartly uses the building's architecture to reference the small predella panels usually found below the central image of a church altarpiece. Note the sly reference to Michelangelo's God and Adam panel in the Sistine Chapel in their interaction between the central man and woman couple. Next. Freddy Hernandez filled the bottom of his mural with images of historic Spanish conquistadors and runaway slaves. Above are images of contemporary Puerto Rican life in New York City, flags, a musician, and a seller of flavored shaved ice. Most of the murals in this talk are long gone. I'm happy to say that this mural still exists, as indicated by an asterisk after the title, and we will see some asterisks as we move along. While some murals last for decades, others disappear within a few years. They are vulnerable to weather, sun, wind, rain. Walls spring leaks and repairs cover or destroy them. Buildings come down, buildings go up, also destroying or covering murals. And sometimes murals are lost due to conflicts and controversy. We might physically lose murals, but it's imperative we do not lose their memory. Next. Mural themes are often reflected in mural titles, and despite the passage of time, many of the issues the Lower East Side murals address are woefully still with us, such as the lack of decent and affordable housing, gentrification, homelessness, slum landlords, and in this mural, the impact of federal budget cuts on housing, the failure of government to adequately address them. Here, the almighty dollar symbolizes what inaction leads to: people homeless, living in hovels, and what, with political will, funding can alleviate so many of our social ills. Murals also address the need for social justice, better education and healthcare, and as recent instances of police brutality have made abundantly clear, improved police community relations. Next. The destruction of nature is the earliest, and for many years, the only New York City mural to question government's lack of enlightened environmental policies. Next. Jim Januzzi's hopeful central image might be realized when people accept how industrialization, seen on the right, negatively impacts an ideal world seen on the left. Quite the foreboding of climate change. Next. Ghetto Ecstasy was City Art's first mural above Houston Street. Soon, the organization would create murals in Brooklyn and Harlem. Directed by Jim Januzzi, the mural was again created by teams, but this time with input from local professional artists who just happened to stop by the workshop and see what was happening. The imagery is anchored by an ankh and small pyramids representing Black culture, a portrait of Ramon Betance, a 19th century doctor and the father of Puerto Rican independence movement, and 7 spears that acknowledge the neighborhood's 7 gangs, each identified by its colors. Jim said that getting all the gangs to agree on this image was no small accomplishment. On the left, the conga player merges both African and Puerto Rican musical traditions. And on the right, a muscular figure breaks free of prison bars, practically bursting out of the picture frame. Next. In Women Hold Up Half the Sky, Tomia Arai's Statue of Liberty is a powerful statement of possibility and accomplishment. Chains may encircle her head, but the staircase spiraling up her arm offers opportunity and advancement. Hands are clasped in unity and fists are raised in celebration. The flames emerging from the torch are of purification, not destruction. Next. In Alan Okada's mural, the 3 floors of a tenement building are shown in cross section. In this area of the Lower East Side, residents spoke the 3 languages, Chinese, Spanish, and English, that make up the title, Chile, Arriba, Rise Up. Images of oppression are at the bottom. On the left, fat rat developers, note the tail, push against the building, impeding the construction of decent housing. On the right, a woman hands over what surely is an exorbitant rent to a I'm sorry. A woman hands over what is surely an exorbitant rent to a slum landlord whose oversized arm morphs into the tentacle of a grasping octopus, an image we'll see later to great effect. At the top, people of all races raise their fists to celebrate community accomplishment. And now I'm going to get up and put on a light because I seem to be getting darker. Okay. Next, please. Alan credits Arlen Huang with the smart design of this mural. At the bottom, 4 tall figures support an unfurling Puerto Rican flag that organizes depictions of urban life, factory workers, and farm laborers. At the top are 3 triumphant figures, and demonstrators carry placards with the mural's title, Work, Education, and Struggle, Seeds of Progressive Change. Its original title, Viva Puerto Rico Libre, Long Live a Free Puerto Rico, can be seen below. Note the portraits of Puerto Rican nationalists Lolita Lebron, Angela Davis, Malcolm X, and Ho Chi Minh, whose presence was vigorously protested by the Vietnam veterans who owned the adjacent parking lot. Twice, their white paint bombs obliterated Ho's face, the second time after the scaffolding was removed. That splotch above the star in the Puerto Rican flag on the right shows it. A tall building has replaced the parking lot, and only a bit of the blue sky at the upper left can still be seen. Too many gentrified development is hardly a seed of progressive change. Next. Tomiya's Wall of Respect presents scenes of Chinese history and contemporary life in New York City's Chinatown. You see that beautiful dragon whose body just cradles all the different vignettes of people working and just generally enjoying themselves. Next. In 1967, before the early Harlem murals and the establishment of city arts, a group of artists in the East Village in Brooklyn began producing large murals to relieve the drab monotony of the city's gray spaces. The artists produced the designs in their studios without community input, and sign painting companies fabricated the murals. The group was called City Walls, and its aesthetics and philosophy were diametrically opposed to that of community muralists. Eva Cockcroft said that these walls served as, quote, a cosmetic function at best, seen by local residents as cultural imperialism. Art critic John Cannaday compared them to, quote, piped music in elevators. Both camps had its supporters and detractors, but I'm always glad to come across one of the few city walls that still exist. Next. Here are 2 by Mel Pekarsky, no longer around. And next. Located on the southern wall of the former Bayview Correctional Facility, a New York State medium security women's prison in New York City. How about that? Venus is now obscured by the Hudson River's overdeveloped waterfront. Next. Here's another mural by Knox Martin. And so far, this one by Tanya on the right still exists. However, the grocery on the ground floor of the building is now closed. And what that bodes is unknown. Next. As we've seen, most city walls were abstract works. An outstanding and much admired exception is Richard Haas's 112 Prince Street. First-time viewers usually experience an eureka moment when realizing that the eastern wall of the cast iron building was a trompe-l'oeil continuation of the actual Prince Street facade. Alas, the mural is very badly deteriorated. What remains of it is very faded and covered with tags. What was so glorious is now so sad to see. Next. Maria Dominguez's work generally focuses on her Puerto Rican heritage. Bailebamba at the top honors the island's music and dance traditions. Bailebamba 2 on the bottom, and these are walls that are sort of adjoining, presents contrasting images of urban and island life, including El Morro Castle and a Vejigante mask, which are worn during carnival time in Ponce. Note the fake window treatments behind those fire escapes. They were a controversial effort of New York City's HPD agency to make vacant buildings look inhabited. Why they couldn't have spent the money to renovate them, we never knew. Next. Tabo took great advantage of the building's architecture in designing his mural. Musicians fill the boarded up windows, and that trumpet player looks ready to dance down the steps. Next. Jeff created 2 faux holes in the real brick wall to portray local denizens and views of the city. Not seen in this slide is former Mayor Ed Koch and then Mayor David Dinkins. They were depicted as panhandlers, begging for handouts for the city. Next. In 1982, Keith Haring created a mural on the wall on the northwest corner of Houston Street and Bowery. It lasted several years despite being a magnet for tags. Then in 2008, the building's owner, Goldman Properties, recreated Haring's mural, and what we're seeing is the original, and turned the wall into a revolving showcase for the world's best regarded street artists. Next. At the bottom center of Hicks' mural, Story of My Life, stands photographer Martha Cooper. Adored by street artists, she has documented graffitied subway trains, as well as the creation of most Bowery Houston walls and street art around the world. Go, Marty. Next. Honoring the cultural heritage of the Afro-Caribbean gardeners in Jardín Bello Amanecer Borinqueño, this mural by visiting Chicago artist John Weber included a large sun mask, citizenship documents, and lines of poetry written in Spanish and English. He combined 2 techniques: free-form concrete relief covered with multicolored bands of stucco, and sgraffito, or the cutting away of layers to reveal the colors and textures underneath. Nearby is a reinforced column, also covered in multicolored stucco. Next. In 1979, Freddie created 3 larger-than-life figures to represent the descendants of African slave, Asian, and Latino immigrants residing in Lower East Side. Ingeniously incorporated into the figures are ships and trains symbolizing their journeys into the New World, as well as cultural icons of the lands left behind. A few years later, the need to waterproof the wall doomed the mural. Next. But in the summer of 1985, art makers adopted the wall to create La Lucha Continua, The Struggle Continues. Here we see the large collective mural and 6 of the project's 26 smaller murals. In a moment, we'll see more of them. Next. However, the wall's surface remained problematic, and after a few years, the La Lucha murals were again covered with tar. In 2015, new owners renovated the building and commissioned this mural, The Salvation of Energy, designed with no community input. Next. The La Lucha murals covered several walls of the 4 mostly vacant buildings surrounding La Plaza Cultural Community Garden. Their placement is indicated on Kristen Reed's map. Local residents had abandoned the garden when drug dealers overran it. The murals brought the community back into the space, and today La Plaza is flourishing. Next. Artmakers founder Eva Cockcroft brought together 34 artists to create the 26 murals. They addressed 6 issues of great concern to Lower East Side residents: gentrification, police brutality, women's issues, immigration, and opposition to apartheid in South Africa and interference in Central America. The collective mural is a portrait of the neighborhood. At the left are negative images: demolitions, evictions, and homelessness. On the right are positive images: sweat equity workers renovating buildings, rooftop solar panels, and a windmill, and a market with fresh, fairly priced produce. Above it, note the artist painting the African, Chinese, and Puerto Rican figures originally in Freddie's mural. And in the center, there's a large crystal ball that holds hopeful images of the future. Next. Acknowledging the power of grassroots activism, Keith's Root of Lower East Side is a metaphor for positive community and social change. The root's limbs, containing the names of community organizations, are cut to show a neighborhood hurting, but the root pushes upwards towards the collective mural and its crystal ball with images of hope. Camille is Artmakers' current artistic director, and along with Eva, documented La Lucha. Believing that liberty, equality, and solidarity are the bedrock of a community, she wrote these words in English, French, Spanish, and Basque. The words surround and hopefully inspire the young soccer players who represent local youth. Next. Alphabet City mural by Noah and his then 13-year-old daughter honors the activist fighting for civil rights and against apartheid in South Africa. In Stop Urban Removal, Willie portrays a protest against gentrification and the resulting displacement of long-time neighborhood residents. Next. Nancy's incorporation of the existing stop sign on the dog cage in front of the wall makes it very clear that the neighborhood is not for sale. Two oversized hands try to halt encroaching development, symbolized by the wrecking ball that threatens the lives of the children playing in the background. Next. Noel's depiction of the rapacious octopus fitted out in stars and stripes perfectly represents corporate greed and government policies that favor the rich. This, like many La Lucha murals, is as relevant today as it was in 1985. Young People Stand Up to Police was inspired by a real incident at a housing rally that took place at City Hall. Note how Seth angled the horse's head to suggest a gun, loaded, aimed, and ready to be fired. Next. Michael Stewart was a street artist who late one night in 1983 was beaten by transit cops at the First Avenue 14th Street subway station. He died 13 days later without gaining consciousness. In his tribute, Chico shows the L train, Michael painting, and the cops with their nightsticks raised. In a photo of an earlier version of the mural, cops were mistakenly holding guns, normally the preferred weapon of the street, not transit cops. Etienne's mural reads like a comic strip. It opens at the Pyramid Club, where Michael flirts with a girl who kisses him goodbye and inspires him to draw his tag. We then see the cops beating him and his body in the morgue, where then Mayor Koch stands in the background. Next. Cliff's mural is not just about apartheid, but the struggle throughout Africa against the legacy of imperialism and the more recent corruption of neo-imperialism. The colors represent the African liberation flag. Red is for conflict, black is for the people, and it's really hard to see, but very lightly outlined is a line of people moving across the mural. And green represents new life and hope for the future. Susan pays tribute to South African women and their role in the anti-apartheid struggle. Wearing boldly colored traditional dress, mothers, students, and workers carry signs calling for the end of apartheid and equal rights to govern, vote, and have better access to housing, jobs, and education. Next. Ricky painted herself, creating her mural for the women of South Africa, Central America, and the Lower East Side. It not only shows the grace and strength of these women, but also brings attention to Nicaragua's red macaw, threatened by El Salvadoran poachers. As you can see, a ghost of the mural still exists. It's on the very last building on East 9th Street on the south side, adjacent to the mural. Next. And here, Central Americans stand strong against the clandestine actions and damaging policies of the United States. Amy, Allison, and Ken honored the people who continue, despite the constant threat of death, to live their lives fully, represented by images of peace, nature, art, music, and dance. And a ghost of this mural also exists on the same building. They're the only two images of La Lucha's 26 murals that are still around. Next. Inspired by pre-Columbian ruins of Mexico and Central America, Dina's gorgeous ceramic piece honors the vitality and dignity of the people against repeated invasions. And in Sueño, Maria expressed her fear that Puerto Rico's traditional arts were being replaced by North American pop culture. A skull lurks behind a Vejigante mask, itself strangled by red, white, and star-spangled blue banners. Next. Pat honors the activism of El Salvadoran women who, during the country's long civil war, waited for their missing sons to come home, holding out hope for hours or days before finally accepting they were probably dead. The grieving mothers are represented by one lone woman facing a landscape marred by an open grave. On the right, this scene of Sandinista soldiers was inspired by stories told by Marilyn's cousin, who fought alongside Che Guevara in Cuba. Sitting around a campfire at night, they ease their struggles with a cooked meal, conversation, and some music, while one soldier looks out off to the right. Next. Karen's mural addresses US involvement in Nicaragua, which, like similar funding and interventions in El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, led to disastrous results. And here, the Iran-Contra affair. In the mural, a Sandinista soldier stands protectively over the children learning to read, while above, helicopters release bombs over the land. Lower East Side kids helped Karen paint the farm scene: a farmer, a cow, a chicken, and some trees. Next. Therese dedicated her mural to the disappeared of Guatemala. A painted map of Central America shows in relief Guatemala rendered in ceramic, framing the indigenous woman at its center, just one of many, are hundreds of names, a fraction of the thousands of Mayans and Ladino peasants who disappeared at the hands of the military-led government supported by the United States. Eva and Joe's mural on the right shows an unlucky migrant stopped at the border and led away by INS agents. Meanwhile, his family, dependent upon his earnings, nervously awaits news. Today, that family might be law-abiding residents in the US, facing the threat of deportation or seeking asylum held at the border, or hoping to be reunited with their children who, in the previous administration, were cruelly separated from their parents. Next. In this mural's top section, Robin, working in her own artistic style, shows famous activists and community members sitting in judgment of the global war makers below. The 6 top row jurors are leaders from Central America and South Africa. People from the neighborhood make up the bottom row of jurors. In the lower section, Kristen, working in her artistic style, sets repeated images of the armed dealers against a field of green. Missiles and guns litter the ground. The issues addressed in the La Lucha murals are still with us, although some of the international venues have changed. Artmakers' commemorative exhibition, La Lucha Continua, The Struggle Continues, 1985 and 2017, was developed for and ran several months at the Lower East Side Center on East 9th Street, across from La Plaza. Next. The La Lucha murals led to many other projects in Lower East Side and beyond, all involving La Lucha alumni. Kristen and Robin teamed up again, here fusing their separate styles. This evocative mural hints at the ambivalence felt in the Puerto Rican community, the economic necessity of being in New York versus the memory of their beautiful island. Robin described the arm niches as, quote, sort of Italianate, filtered through Latin America. Next. In 1987 and 8, Dina created gargoyles to scare the developers, 29 ceramic bas-reliefs installed on buildings throughout the neighborhood. Viewed as protectors of the community, they declared that these buildings and their residents were not for sale. Next. Maria directed the 6-mural cluster at El Bohío, the community center run by Charis, which partnered with art makers in the creation of La Lucha Continua. Next. The El Bohío murals, painted in the artist's individual styles, spoke to the Lower East Side experience. Maria's mural shows the pure joy of Puerto Rican dancing at the Lower East Center Annual Festival, which this year live streams on 2 upcoming Sundays, May 23rd and 30th. Next. Inspired by famous works by late 19th century Puerto Rican painters, Eva shows herself against a New York City skyline, painting the portrait of an elderly Lower East Side woman, which is based on a work by Miguel Pú Becerra. In the original, the woman holds an image of the Madonna, here replaced by Ramon Frades Farmer. Next. I really have no information about these murals by Roland Vega and Pedro Fidal, nor those in the next slide. Next, please. And next. Artmakers Multimedia, The Changing Face of Soho, addressed the gentrification of this downtown Manhattan neighborhood. 19 artists created its various elements, which lasted for 10 years at the Bleecker Street entrance to the downtown number 6 train before the station underwent its own gentrification. The project's painted, oops, if you could go back, please. Thank you. The project's painted mural chronicles the people, activities, and architecture of Soho, Little Italy, and Lower Broadway. Now next. The 9x8 ceramic mural wittily describes the plight of an artist who repeatedly loses her Soho living and workspaces to commercial expansion. The project also included 9 individual pieces in paint, sculpture, photography, and ceramic that were placed in the station's recessed niches. Next. La Lucha Continua directly inspired Mike Alowitz's Pathfinder mural across town in Greenwich Village. Painted by 80 muralists from 20 countries, the mural celebrated revolutionary struggles in Cuba, Grenada, Nicaragua, and South Africa, as well as local international uprisings of the exploited working classes. The mural's central image is a large red printing press. The pages are portraits of working class and revolutionary leaders whose works were published by Pathfinder Press, which had its operations in this building. Ultra-conservative pundit Pat Buchanan called the mural a 6-story shrine to communism, a Marxist Mount Rushmore in Greenwich Village. the image of Fidel was defaced so many times that a 24-hour guard was ultimately installed. And on the right, you can see three vignettes. They come from the upper right of the mural. And Eva Cockcroft painted Mother Jones, kind of on the upper right. And she also painted the Rosa Luxemburg vignette that May Stevens designed, but she could not come and paint it herself. Next. Pathfinder intern inspired When Women Pursue Justice, Artmakers Bed-Stuy mural that honors 90 activists who, risking life and liberty, fought for social change in the United States, for voting rights, civil rights and racial justice, reproductive rights, environmental justice, and rights for workers, immigrants, and gays. Viewed as a large demonstration, its central image is Shirley Chisholm on a golden steed, bearing a standard proclaiming a catalyst for change, words she wanted to be remembered by. She is surrounded by portraits of 14 movement leaders on the demonstration placards and smaller portraits of 67 activists, including the 9 ancestors who ushered in 20th century activism. And those ancestors are on the upper left, surrounding the very beautiful portrait of Dorothy Day. Next. A memorial mural, homage to Eva, commemorates the life of Artmakers founder Eva Cockcroft, who died from breast cancer in 1999. Located on the East 3rd Street wall of the Lower East Side People's Federal Credit Union, it honors her profound influence on scores of community muralists. The dancing couple at the upper left and the man sleeping under his walker at lower right are based on Eva's studio paintings. Most striking is the central image of Eva painting the female construction workers that earlier appeared in the large crystal ball in La Lucha's collective mural. Next. The Chico Mendes mural garden was named for the Brazilian grassroots leader, murdered for his efforts to protect the Amazon rainforest. He is honored in Ron English's memorial mural, one of 4 murals in the garden. There's also pieces of sculpture as well. It was the raising of this garden, along with 3 others, in late 1997 that prompted protests a few weeks later at the second mayoral inauguration of Rudy Giuliani. Out for vengeance, Giuliani then put 114 gardens up for sale at unrestricted auction, which was ultimately stopped by a court injunction. Next. Paul Farinacci's mural at the entry of the Chico Mendes mural garden was one of 8 murals sponsored by New York City's Artists for Smoking Prevention program to counter cigarette advertising. This surreal rendering shows a pregnant woman and her fetus in cross-section. She's smoking, the fetus cradled around a cigarette. When housing replaced the garden, the Visual Artists' Rights Act saved this mural and part of Chico's In Memory of Anthony. Next. Here is another Artists for Smoking Prevention mural, this one located on East 4th Street, east of Bowery. Next. This beautiful 9/11 mural by Hope Gangloff and Jason Search was painted on a Cooper Union-owned building shortly after Al-Qaeda's 2001 attack on the World Trade Center. Set against a starry, deep blue sky, New York City's framed skyline is studded with thousands of tiny windows, and the iconic towers are filled with flowers. echoing the mounds of blooms laid in front of firehouses and in parks. Next. Making art in public, muralists have had plenty of opportunity in the past year to, in the words of Mike Gallowitz, assert our existence as social beings. Artists have protested the too many unwarranted murders of Black and brown men and women by the police. And they've also celebrated the resilient and brave first responders who've healed and nurtured us during the pandemic. Protest and celebration. If you want to know more about New York's community murals, you can't beat this cultural history, co-authored by Janet Braun-Reinitz and me. Next. And to learn more about the 2017 La Lucha Continua exhibition, you can visit the website laluchaartmakers.org. And I believe that that link will show up in the chat. And do know that both the catalog and on the wall can be found at both the Tompkins Square and Hudson Park libraries, our hosts tonight. Thank you so much for zooming into this talk.